Hello everyone. As I've recently started my own YouTube gaming channel, and seeing as how 2020 is rapidly coming to a close, I thought it would be nice to look back and reflect on all the games I've finished this year. This year has been all about catching up with games from recent years that I'd purchased but never played, or that I played a decade ago and never finished. I made a spreadsheet listing all the games I wanted to play, what platform they were on, whether or not I owned them, and the average time to be beaten. I still have a long ways to go, but I'm happy that I was both able to play and finish almost 2 dozen games this year. Having purchased a PlayStation 4 Slim on Black Friday in 2019, a lot of the games I played this year were PlayStation exclusives, as it felt like I had several years worth of games to catch up with. I began the year with Until Dawn, one of the PS4 games I've been looking forward to playing for some time. God of War was the first PS4 game I played, and Until Dawn was the second. But Until Dawn was my first Platinum trophy, which I'll never forget that. Also in January, I played The Outer Worlds on Xbox One. It was included with the Xbox Game Pass, a service I've made good use of on multiple occasions. And being from developer Obsidian, there was a lot of hype leading up to its release, and it did not disappoint. The last game I remember playing by the same developers was Fallout New Vegas, which I enjoyed a lot more than Fallout 3, which is still an awesome game by all means. However, knowing what this developer was capable of, many gamers, myself included, were looking forward to seeing what they would do with a first-person sci-fi RPG, and traveling with a ragtag group of crew on board the Unreliable and going from planet to planet was a short but amazing venture to begin 2020. Lastly, in January, I finally finished an 80-hour world domination campaign in Empire Total War. I've been a fan of the Total War series ever since they released Medieval Total War for the PC back in 2002. And Empire Total War saw the campaign expand to not just conquering all of Europe and Russia, but the entire continents of North, South, and Central America, as well as India. The game came out all the way back in 2009, and I had played it on and off over the years since. But last year I was determined to finally finish conquering Europe and India, and by the very beginning of February of 2020, I had succeeded in my goal. Was it worth the time? It's hard to say. Did I enjoy it? Yes. Would I conquer the 18th century world all over again? Probably not anytime soon. From there I moved on to A Plague Tale: Innocence in February. The trailers for this game caught my attention right away, and as soon as it went on sale I purchased it and played it for my Xbox One. The relationship between the main character Amicia and her younger brother Hugo was heartfelt, and even though the entire game was an escort mission, between the puzzles, the plague rats, and the Inquisition trying to murder me at any chance they got, I didn't mind it one bit. I'm eagerly looking forward to its sequel whenever that comes in the future. Afterwards, I finished Wolfenstein II: The New Colossus. Now, I loved the first Wolfenstein, but I really struggled to get into the sequel. I could barely remember any of the supporting characters, and the game really seemed to drag on for me. It got to the point that I played through 3/4 of it by September of 2019, and I didn't pick it back up again until early February of 2020. And mostly because of a sense of not wanting to leave the game unfinished, and just had to push through to move on to the next game, and finally be done with it. Weedcraft Incorporated for the PC is the game I moved on to next. The game lets you choose from 3 different campaigns to start up your own weed growing and selling business in different locations around the United States, and the concept seemed really interesting to me. However, I never finished the game. I played around 25 hours of it, and I ended up restarting the game at least 3 separate times because I got to a point in the story where the difficulty of managing my new business suddenly spiked to a point that I tried several different approaches in order to continue progressing the campaign in a much more manageable way, and I just couldn't do it, and it unfortunately made me lose interest pretty quickly. I ended up drowning my sorrows in Call of Duty Black Ops 3. It's now March, and for the record, I've been a fan of the Call of Duty series ever since it first released on PC in 2003, when we were storming the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. I'm also a big fan of sci-fi. That said, I just could not get into this game. And just like Wolfenstein before it, I had to push through to finish the campaign and move on to something better. The story was very confusing and convoluted, and by the end, I wasn't even sure who the bad guy was or what the story was even about. I remember there were some evil robots and some virtual reality involved, and that's about it. I ended up just shrugging, uninstalling it from my Xbox, and moving on with my life. At this point in March, Two Point Hospital has released on Xbox Game Pass. This game is a spiritual successor to Theme Hospital that released on the original PlayStation. I have been eyeing the game on Steam for some time now, and I jumped on it as soon as it was available for free on the console. I will admit that I did not get very far into the campaign, as I reached another huge difficulty spike around the 5th hospital or so, and I quickly lost interest. At the beginning of April, I popped in Marvel's Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4. I had heard nothing but praise for this game, and it was well deserved. I blew through the campaign, along with all the collectibles and side missions. The feeling of leaping from the tallest building in Manhattan and plummeting to the earth as the music builds to a resounding crescendo around you as you unleash your web shooters and catapult through the city will forever be a fond memory of mine from gaming in 2020. Final Fantasy VII Remake released on April 10th, 2020, just a few days before my birthday, since I had been eagerly awaiting this game since the PlayStation 3 tech demo was shown in 2005, teasing fans with a potential remake. You can only imagine how excited I was to finally have this game in my hands after years of waiting. Final Fantasy VII released on the original PlayStation in 1997 when I was around 9 years old, and it was my first experience with a narrative, story-driven game, and I've been a fan of the Final Fantasy series ever since. And I can only heap praise for the developers. This game checked all the boxes and hit all the marks, from the gorgeous visuals to the revamped music by legendary composer Nobu Uematsu, all the way down to the micro-expressions on the characters' faces. It doesn't take long to see the labor of love the developers put into this game. I know it's only the first part, and we have no idea where the story is going or how many parts of the story there will be, but best believe I am here for it. Now, after putting dozens of hours into Final Fantasy VII Remake, I turned to Monster Hunter World Iceborne. I put at least 200 hours into the base game, but I hadn't played since August of 2019, which at this point was almost 9 months ago. So when I say I was out of practice and got my ass handed to me, I really mean it. Unfortunately, after only slaying a handful of the expansion's new monsters, I had to call it quits, simply because I did not have the time nor energy to invest countless more hours to grinding for new gear, nor to cease the continuous ass-kicking that Brachiotos kept giving me over and over again. And since this year saw the game's final update with the release of the Ultimate Elder Dragon Fatalis, I have been entertaining the thought of picking up the game again in the near future. This year, I was on a downloadable content kick. Over the years, I had purchased DLC for multiple games when they went on sale, but never got around to playing them. This year, I made it a focus to change that, since I saw no reason to spend money and just watch as a game sat unplayed while still installed on my console's hard drive. As for the previously mentioned Monster Hunter World DLC, I next played through the entirety of Assassin's Creed Odyssey's DLC, including the Fate of Atlantis and the Legacy of the First Blade. Now, I've been a fan of the Assassin's Creed series since it first released back in 2007 on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and I'm also a huge fan of open world games. That said, Odyssey was a bit of a slog for me to get through. I know it's a common complaint amongst gamers, and I just want to add my voice to that. By comparison, The Witcher 3 had numerous side quests, activities, and countless question marks littering the game world for me to explore, and I did so willingly and excitedly because of how well written the side content was. I can't exactly say the same for Odyssey and its DLC. As stated before, I purchased the Season Pass while it was on sale, and I pushed through the expansions and finished the game as fast as humanly possible. After putting around 160 hours into Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I purposely played a game that I knew to be short but sweet. I popped The Order 1886 into my PlayStation 4 and it was a welcome change. Shooting supernatural beasts with a Tesla rifle was amazing, and I finished the game and got all the trophies I could in just 2 days. After completing the game, I hope they make a sequel. Like many others, I hope they actually put the time and effort into crafting a worthwhile narrative that can be completed in more than just a few hours. Jumping back onto the DLC train, it's now July, and I've reinstalled Fallout 4 and its Season Pass onto my Xbox One. Fallout 4 was the reason I purchased the Xbox One back in 2015, and despite its valid criticisms, I thoroughly enjoyed this game. I played through it multiple times so I could get the different endings by following the quest lines of the different factions. The DLC, including Far Harbor and Nuka World, were fun and interesting to play, and I think my favorite part was uncovering the mystery in Far Harbor as to whether or not someone was a synthetic being or not. After earning all the achievements I could throughout the various DLCs, I was extremely satisfied to uninstall this game from my hard drive. As I said, I purchased this game as the first to play on the Xbox One, and to complete all the DLC and move on sort of felt like the closing of a chapter in gaming for me, especially as we approach the new console generation in just a couple of months. Speaking of closing chapters, the next game I finished was The Walking Dead: The Final Season. As a fan of Telltale Games' series, including their other works like Game of Thrones, Minecraft Story Mode, and Batman, playing through their final chapter of Clementine's adventure was nerve-wracking, to say the least. I had watched this character grow from a scared little girl into a young adult who had stared death in the eye and never flinched. Watching her become the strong, resilient fighter over 4 seasons of games was an amazing experience, and with each decision I made in the final season, it had me question whether or not I was about to kill Clementine once and for all. 10 out of 10 would buy again. It's now the beginning of August, and I decided to play Horizon Zero Dawn Complete Edition that came packaged with my PlayStation 4 Slim. I instantly understood the heaps of praise and awards this game has received. After the slog of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, this was a welcome open-world adventure that I blew through in about 2 weeks. Aloy's adventure had me enraptured as she uncovered ancient mysteries and discovered what exactly happened with the humans and the machines hundreds of years ago and what exactly is Project Zero Dawn. I am eagerly awaiting the sequel, Horizon Forbidden West, and I'm looking forward to playing it in 2021. Continuing on my train of playing open world games, I began playing Death Stranding for the PlayStation 4. Now, full disclosure, I'm fully aware of the well-earned reputation Hideo Kojima has for his innovative titles like Silent Hill and Metal Gear Solid, but this is actually the first game of his that I played and finished. Over the past few years, I watched the various trailers for this game and wondered, just like everyone else, what the hell is going on. Needless to say, I was intrigued. What I did not expect was to spend over 100 hours trekking across the entirety of the United States to reconnect the country by delivering packages, pizzas, and other goods while simultaneously avoiding supernatural monsters. The atmosphere, the ambiance, the music, the visuals, the story, even if a little bit convoluted at times, mwah, chef's kiss, would play again. It's now October, and I'm still on my open world kick with Ghost of Tsushima. I remember seeing the reveal trailer in 2017 and my jaw dropped to the floor. Journeying across the island of Tsushima on horseback and just marveling at its beautifully crafted landscape and its breathtaking visuals was a highlight in gaming for 2020 for me. Probably my fondest memory was calling my girlfriend over to help me compose a haiku whenever I found a spot for Jin Sakai to sit and reflect upon his travels, and gaze at the beautiful scenery around him. I hope Sucker Punch continues with its new IP with the release of the PlayStation 5 and beyond. Hopping one last time back onto the DLC train, it's still October and I decided to finally push through and finish all 4 of Final Fantasy XV's DLC. And let me plainly say that I was not impressed. Now, I've already stated before that I'm a huge fan of the Final Fantasy series. So for those of you who may not know, Final Fantasy XV, by all accounts, was in development hell for many years. I looked forward to playing this game for years before it was finally released at the tail end of 2016, right after I'd gone through a bad breakup, and I poured at least 60 hours into the game in order to distract myself and get away from reality. However, I would like to join the chorus of criticisms in that Final Fantasy XV's story was so confusing and convoluted that it required players to not only play the main game, but watch the movie Kingsglaive, watch the anime Brotherhood, read a novel, play all 4 DLCs that contained huge missing chunks of the main story, and then wrap it all up with another novel that contained all the story elements of the cancelled second season of downloadable content. So, since I hadn't played the game since I beat it back in 2016, not only did I not remember any of the secondary characters, but I even struggled to remember how these missing links fit into the main narrative. All that said, I actually really enjoyed episode Ignis and episode Arden. Playing as Ignis, the cool, calm, and wise party member, and watching him single-handedly take on an invading enemy army before putting on the Ring of the Lucii, and watching him unleash the power of kings, which brought holy hell onto his enemies, but cost him his eyesight in the end, was a truly epic moment, and one that I wish I had experienced years ago when the game originally released. And in that same vein, playing episode Arden and seeing the trauma and heartache that character went through over thousands of years before he could enact his revenge was another story beat I wish I could have witnessed in the original game. In my opinion, it would have turned a somewhat flat character who seemed to be evil for evil's sake into a much more complex character who has specific motivations and nuances into everything he does. All in all, the Final Fantasy franchise just hasn't been hitting the same high marks for me in recent years, and thankfully playing Final Fantasy VII Remake earlier this year really reinvigorated my love and admiration I had for the series. I took a short break from console gaming at the end of October and devoted some significant time playing Total War 3 Kingdoms. I was a big fan of the Dynasty Warriors series in the PlayStation 2 era of the early 2000s. These games follow the story of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel, which is equal parts fiction, fantasy, and history, as it tells of the formation and unification of 3rd century China, putting my PC's graphics settings to maximum and then raising a massive army to take over feudal China has never been more satisfying. It's now November, and the year is beginning to draw to a close. I decided to devote a few weeks to completely finish Detroit Become Human for PlayStation 4. My first playthrough, I didn't use any hints or guides, as I tried to make all the decisions I thought were morally right. What I did not expect was to play a game that really made me question what I would do in a similar situation. 2020 has been a vile year for all, and watching the androids in this game be treated as slaves and abused as such really felt more significant than ever. This is definitely a game I will remember playing for the rest of my life, and one that I hope many other people will play and enjoy, and at the very least stop and think for a moment and ask whether or not they've been treating people in their life with the dignity and respect that person deserves, despite their country of origin, religion, gender, race, or sexual identity. Respect is something I always knew, but I think this game really helped reinforce the fact that everyone deserves it. When not starting the Android Uprising, I was playing Sea of Thieves with friends. The game was available for free via the Xbox Game Pass for PC, but I will admit that this was not a game I expected to get into this year. I had watched some friends play, and I was instantly hooked. Add to the fact that I was playing on a gaming PC I had built last summer, and putting all the graphic settings to maximum never ceases to be satisfying. While I do have some minor criticisms of the game, being able to live out my pirate fantasy with my very own ship in a virtual world has never been more real and exciting. I think my biggest praise for the game is its simplistic design and cartoony characters, yet the developers did not skimp for a second on the game's water effects. I will be honest, I don't think I've ever seen more detailed or realistic water graphics in the game before, which helps because you spend about 90% of the time sailing around from one island to another. Sea of Thieves is definitely a game I'm going to continue playing in the new year. This year has been especially unique for me as I started a Dungeons and Dragons campaign for the first time ever in January. This is my first time as the Dungeon Master, and despite the many hiccups that 2020 has brought us, my group has been able to keep our campaign going for the entire year. That said, when Baldur's Gate 3 released on Steam as early access, I immediately jumped on it. Again, putting my PC's graphics settings to maximum and playing through a legitimate Dungeons and Dragons adventure has never been more satisfying. The game is still in early access, with a couple of noticeable bugs and glitches here and there, but it's not hard to see the love and attention to detail the developers are putting into this title. Having finished the available content in the early access version of the game, I am eagerly awaiting the release of the finished product. Throughout 2020, I made it a point to play through old games I still owned and hadn't picked up in years, or play through the DLC for games I had already beaten but hadn't even bothered finishing the expansions of. But one game I picked up and put down more times in 2020 was The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess for the Nintendo Wii. I played the game all the way back in 2008 but never finished it, and by the end of November, and about 50 hours later, I had finally completed the game and was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Probably the main reason for wanting to finish this game was the fact that I had planned on getting a Nintendo Switch for Black Friday this year, and I really wanted to play The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. However, part of me feels guilty having not played Skyward Sword yet, so I decided that Skyward Sword would be one of the first games I play to completion in 2021. I just hope and pray that since Skyward Sword requires the use of the Wii Motion Plus controller, Nintendo finally got a handle on the god-awful motion controls for Twilight Princess. Like I said in the previous entry, one of my goals was to purchase a Nintendo Switch come Black Friday of this year. The edition I got came pre-packaged with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a game my girlfriend couldn't wait to play. Previously, we had both enjoyed playing Mario Kart Wii together and would often play a game we called Drunk Driving, where you have to finish a beer before the race is over. However, you can't drink and drive at the same time, so the usual strategy is to either pull over and chug, or to chug at the very start of the race and hope that you can catch up with everyone. Needless to say, jumping from the outdated graphics of the Wii to the gorgeous and stylistic visuals of the Nintendo Switch was a welcome improvement. And even though I've only had the Switch for a couple of weeks now, there have already been several drunk driving matches between my girlfriend and I. My final game of 2020 should come as no surprise to anyone that likes to play games and has been keeping up with the current controversies in the gaming industry, that is Cyberpunk 2077. I originally pre-ordered this game for my Xbox One, but after seeing reviews pop up about how badly it was playing on the previous generation consoles, I decided to take a chance and purchased it for my PC instead. And let me tell you that I am glad I did. As of this writing, I've put in about 90 hours into the game, completing every single side mission, gig, and other collectibles in the game. I'm fast approaching the end, and thankfully, I have not run into any game-breaking bugs or glitches, besides a myriad of animation glitches or objects spontaneously exploding in the background. As a huge fan of the Witcher series, including the games, books, and the Netflix series, I've also become a huge fan of developer CD Projekt Red over the years. And while I think this game has some deserved criticism for how buggy its launch has been, roam around the streets of Night City has been an amazing adventure, and I can clearly see the amount of love and attention to detail the developers have put into this game. My heart goes out for those that have been unable to play or haven't had the same experience playing the game as I have. But I am hopeful for the future when all the bugs and glitches are fixed and this game wins all the accolades it justly deserves. Before I move on to my game of the year, I wanted to highlight a couple of games I'm looking forward to playing in the new year. This is a small collection of games that are both older and unreleased games to come. Starting off with Lost Odyssey, released back in 2007 for the Xbox 360. I was around 18 or 19 years old when I first played this game and absolutely loved it. But I was a sophomore in college at the time and got about halfway through it and never finished it. I recently purchased the game for around $10 used, and I'm eagerly looking forward to playing it and finally beating it over a decade later. Next is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This game needs no introduction. Released for the Nintendo Switch in 2018, I have heard nothing but praise for this game from so many friends and other outlets, and it was honestly one of the main reasons I picked up the Nintendo Switch on Black Friday a few weeks ago. Also for the Nintendo Switch is Octopath Traveler. I don't know much about the game, only that it was published by Square Enix, which, if you hadn't figured out already, I am a big fan of their games, and this one looks like an old school 2D JRPG mixed with some side-scrolling 3D environments, and let me just say that I am here for it. Coming sometime in the future for the PlayStation 5 is Horizon Forbidden West. Having finished Horizon Zero Dawn earlier this year and seeing what an amazing game that was, I know I am among many other players who are eagerly awaiting the release of Forbidden West. Also for the PlayStation 5 is Little Devil Inside. The trailer for this game looks to me like a cartoony Monster Hunter game, but I don't know much else about it, to be honest. Based off the trailer, I get the feeling that there will be multiple stories going on at once, the main one being with the young man out in the woods surviving the elements and slaying monsters, and the other story follows the young man's father or grandfather as he looks to be living a boring life at home. At first I thought this was a PlayStation 5 exclusive, but then I found out it looks to be releasing on the other platforms as well, including last-gen consoles. Little Devil Inside has a release date of sometime in 2021. Also in 2021, we should see the release of Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. The previous game, Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, was a breathtaking visual masterpiece with groundbreaking facial motion capture and voice acting. This trailer seems to continue the theme of following Norse mythology. I'm also curious to see how Senua's mental state and psychosis continue to develop and possibly deteriorate further as her saga continues. Sometime in the future, we should see the release of Final Fantasy XVI, which is being developed by the same team at Square Enix who developed Final Fantasy XIV, the online MMORPG first released in 2010. Now, for those of you that don't know, when Final Fantasy XIV first released, it was another buggy mess. And after about 2 years or so, the developers came out and apologized for releasing such a dumpster fire of a game and vowed to turn it around. They took the game offline for over a year and completely reworked it from the ground up before re-releasing it under the title Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn in 2013. I played this MMO for the next 3 years or so, and I thoroughly enjoyed every second of it. Fast forward to the reveal trailer released earlier this year, and Final Fantasy XVI looks to have a similar art style as Final Fantasy XIV, but also a return to the franchise's more fantasy-esque roots that it's sort of gotten away from in previous releases of the game. I mention this because after devoting a few years of my life to playing this game and knowing that there's a talented team of developers behind this game, it's another in a long list of games I am looking forward to playing in the future. And finally, the last game I'm looking forward to playing in the near future is Halo Infinite. I've been a fan of the Halo series ever since it first released on the original Xbox back in 2001. I have many fond memories playing death matches with my friends as we grew up, so Halo is easily one of those games that helped define my childhood, just like Mario, The Legend of Zelda, and Sonic the Hedgehog. The developers, 343 Industries, delayed the game from fall of 2020 with the release of the Xbox Series X and S and promised to fine-tune and polish the game for a potential fall of 2021 release. And lastly, I would like to name my game of the year for 2020, and that is, drumroll please, Final Fantasy VII Remake. This should not come as a surprise to anyone who has played the game or even seen the trailers and gameplay videos online. After years of delays and setbacks and the game changing developer hands, I think there was honestly some part of me that thought I would never see this game released. After the dumpster fire of a year we've all had, finally being able to sit down and play this masterpiece of a game was absolutely worth the wait. And there we go. That is my list of a review on gaming for the year 2020. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are all well, and Happy New Year. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving me a like and possibly a subscribe. This channel is a new hobby and a new adventure for me, so feel free to stick around to see where it goes. Thank you so much for watching.